Greetings, it's Will from StormTheCastle.com, and you are listening to the Sense of Wonder podcast. And before starting this episode, I just wanted to say that last week I said that today I would do an episode about how art died with Vincent Van Gogh. But that podcast is not ready yet, so I have more work to do on that one. So hopefully I'll get that one done for next Sunday. But this episode, I think you might enjoy this episode. It's about my trip to Egypt and Cairo. Enjoy. Thanks. Thanks for listening. I got a few things to say about Egypt. A few things about people, about poverty, about living in a bubble, and about marketing campaigns. I'll get to that. First off, I guess my generation, it's kind of an Indiana Jones thing, I guess you could say, is traveling to Egypt, the pyramids, the Sphinx, and all the mummies, and the desert, the Giza Plateau. It's all very Indiana Jones. So it had always been on my list of places to see, and I'm glad I went. I spent a couple of weeks there. But, I did, well, let me tell you some stories. First off, the first thing I remember, my very first impression of Egypt, I flew into Cairo. Amazing city in different ways than you think. But, and the airport is outside of Cairo. It's not in Cairo. It's outside of Cairo. I forget where, to the north or something. It's kind of like on the border between the desert and the city. There's a lot of desert. And my first impression was of the beautiful smell of the desert. And I don't know if that's because something was in bloom. Maybe a particular type of plant, a flower, a cactus, something. They don't have cactus in Egypt, do they? Well, something was in bloom. And it just had this beautiful sweet smell in the air, this desert air. I really liked that. I'll never forget it. It was my first impression of Egypt and Cairo. And I liked it a lot. Let me talk a little bit about living in a bubble. I'm American, live in America, so I live in a bubble. If you're American or European or Canadian, you live in a first world country, it can be quite a shock to go to a third world country, and Egypt's a mess. A lot of it is just different poverty. There's a lot of places that just don't have the structure that we as Americans have. We take a lot of things for granted, like something happens to you, you call 911 and an ambulance is there within 7 minutes to bring you to the hospital. And there's a lot of places in Egypt that it's not like that at all. And it's not just that. It's fire and police, and we have a culture, a stable society. Although lately it doesn't seem that way, but past couple of years since what hit the world. But Egypt is not like that. Egypt is a troubled country. It's been in a lot of trouble for a long time now. And people act differently, You have to do different things to just exist. Let me try to give you some examples. And a thing that kind of shocked me was they put me in a district of Cairo where all the embassies are. I was looking at maps. I was like, wow, look at all these different embassies and beautiful parks and walkways and really nice section of the city. I was a little surprised by that, but there's a reason for that. Is as an American tourist or as a tourist, it's safe. My hotel had a manned metal detector and a couple of guards with guns. And these weren't, slackers. these guards were alert and walking around the embassy areas. And I guess partly it's the embassies, but partly it's just security and tourists and visitors and walking around. I really, truth be told, almost every block was some kind of a police officer standing around with a machine gun. It's not an exaggeration. So I was a little surprised by that. You don't really see that. You don't see that anywhere in the developed countries. You just don't anticipate that kind of trouble. So that was a bit of a shock to me. And let me see about people doing the things they have to do. The system is broken over there in Egypt. The economy is a mess. A lot of people living on the fringes. And you have to kind of adapt to that, which you don't really realize. I was talking to somebody in the hotel saying, hey, listen, one of the people that work there, I said, hey, all right. So I said, I want a taxi to drive me around for the day. And he said, yeah, you go outside and you can hire a taxi for the day. So I went outside, and there's a line of like taxis, but they're, little cars with guys in them. And I picked one. I went up to him and I said, hey, I want to hire you for the day. And the guy was just so excited. His English was pretty good, and he was just so excited. And I said, how much is it going to be? He was like, well, how much do you want to pay? What do you think? I said, well, I want you to kind of just drive me around the city. I want to stop in a few different places, the bazaar and here and there. And how about $50 for the day? And the guy started to cry. I mean, literally started to cry. At his windfall, I guess. He was so appreciative of that, that struck me. Never forget it. I can still see his face, so he drove me around for the day here and there and dropped me off at a place and come back for me in a couple hours and took me another place and showed me some sights, and we chatted and talked. It was nice. I hired him the next day too, I think. I actually hired him several days in a row. Get me around to different things. So this is, human beings, living in a different, we take things for granted when we live in a stable, developed, productive country. I saw a lot of, driving around here and there. I had to be careful. Really did. Walking around, I had to be careful. Marked as a tourist, clearly with my backpack and big, tall, blue-eyed guy. I guess there's a double-edged sword to that. I'm marked as a possible mark, but I'm a big guy. So, and there's also probably the fragments of police, and probably come down really hard on locals that mess with tourists because it's money. Let me talk about marketing. I wanted to really bring this point up about the pyramids and the Sphinx. Now I love the pyramids. I love the Sphinx. The whole story. It's the Orion's belt is clearly Orion's belt. In the constellation of Orion, the three pyramids are the three stars in Orion's belt, and there's even the M42. Is it M42 or M41? Nebula in the constellation is clearly a cemetery. It's all laid out right in the pyramid, right in the Giza plateau. But anyway. But I was a little bit, I guess you could say, disappointed, because the pyramids and the Sphinx and all of this are made out to be such this amazing, amazing thing, and they're really not that amazing. I hate to say it. Don't mean to be a naysayer. I'd like to see the positive, but I don't know. I looked at those blocks and I says, you know what? You give me a couple of dozen, I could move those blocks. You give me enough people, I can build the pyramids without, mechanization, without, tractors. The blocks aren't really that big. And the Sphinx, a single family home is bigger than the Sphinx. It's not that impressive in terms of, so all that aside, the building of the pyramids, which are not that big, the Sphinx, which is really not that big, is not that impressive. I guess the impressive thing about them is the durability and how long they've been around. There's been stories of 3,000 years, 6,000 years, maybe more, 15,000 years. You've heard all kinds of stories. Who knows, right? So I guess that's important, that these things they are unique. There is I guess, a uniqueness to these things. But there is marketing involved, And it's probably, the earliest example going back to the 1880s, 1870s of the mystique of the pyramids, which I guess there is something to that. And I'm satisfied and glad I went. I was happy and rode my camel. I hired a camel and rode out to the pyramids, which in itself is marketing. It's not that big a deal. The pyramids are not far from Cairo at all anymore. Urban sprawl, the city is just sprawled. I think it's like a mile, maybe 2 miles from the city. So, you don't have to go on this big adventure to get out to the pyramids, which is nice. And, I did fall off my camel. I love to tell that story. My saddle slipped. Just slowly started slipping until I finally fell right off the camel and I hit the sand, the desert, pretty hard because camels are tall. The camels are a lot taller than horses. Then my camel tried to trample me. He was mad at me. I told my tour guide, I said, hey, I'm not getting back on that camel. He had a horse. I says, I'm riding the horse. You get on the camel. So he said, okay. So I rode my camel almost all the way out to the pyramids. Then I rode a horse the rest of the way. And I rode the horse back too. But, it is interesting. You got to be careful in a place like Egypt. And what made me think about Egypt was just last week I get another alert. So I'm signed up with all these different embassies in the United States. I get these alerts from various countries saying if there's trouble. And I just get an alert about Egypt, about travel advisory because there's trouble going on with terrorism and I don't know what else. I don't plan on going back, but so that's Egypt. I'm so glad I went. The experience was wonderful for me. Once in a lifetime thing to see the pyramids and the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau and one more thing. Let me tell you one more thing. Mummies. King Tut, the museum. I didn't see King Tut. He wasn't there. Only his his shroud was there. But he was on tour. The guy is like a rock star. His mummified body goes on tour. So he wasn't in the museum. But this is fascinating. The museum at the time, I don't know how they're doing now, but there's a lot of political unrest in Egypt and a lot of stuff going on. People jockeying for power, and the museum had fallen into kind of partial disarray, and but it was kind of a mess. And there were literally mummies piled on top of mummies. And I guess if you lived in a place where there was just gold under every rock, after a while you wouldn't pay that much attention to it. You'd have gold piled up different places. You just pile it up. And Egypt is so rich with mummies. But I was a little shocked by the fact that they literally, in corners of the museum, different, they had some of, like King Tut's area was really nicely done, and that's a big money maker. But there were rooms and areas that were not well kept as far as museums go. I've been to, the greatest museums in the world, the Louvre, the Met, and the museum in Cairo was quite a bit different, nostalgic, very Indiana Jones. But I was really shocked to see, piles of mummies. I couldn't get over it. I should have took pictures. I didn't take any pictures. I'm not sure if they didn't allow pictures. I forget. But, in the corner of a room somewhere, there'd be a mummy and another mummy on top of it and another mummy on top of it. I'm like, what the heck? This is crazy. It's just, I don't know. So, that's Egypt. On one day I had a tour guide taking me around at different places, a young man. He was very suspicious, and we were out walking around different ruins, and he had a friend show up. Now I had two tour guides just trying to get money out of me, and they separated me from my backpack. One offered to carry my backpack for me just at the right opportune moment when I was climbing through some stuff, and before you know it, he disappeared. I ran after him. He wasn't running, but he kind of disappeared around a corner. I was like, oh, son of a... They separated me from my gear, to get a chance to go through it, because I would imagine you're living in a poor economy like that. A laptop or a cell phone is pretty valuable. But I didn't lose anything, but I get pretty... Yeah, I took my backpack from the guy. I wouldn't let him carry it. He sauntered off. I was back to having only one tour guide, but so that's it. So that's Egypt. I'll never forget the smell when I first arrived. And it's something we don't think about a lot when we travel, and you get that. I've gotten that in different places. Every place has its distinct flora and fauna and types of trees and its own particular smells, which is beautiful. A Little Travel Stories, Egypt. Thank you.